Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 30th of April 2024. Let's get to the military aid. That will take up the entirety of this video. There's a little bit to talk about, not crazy amount. So we're going to start with Zelensky meeting with Jens Stoltenberg, the Director General of NATO, where they talked about apparently a potential for $100 billion NATO fund over 5 years. It's exactly the sort of thing that Ukraine need. They just need huge amounts of stuff. They need to be able to order lots of equipment. They need to be able to order Patriots or get Patriots from somewhere and then backfill these other countries. In early March, says Euromaidan Press, Politico reported that Stoltenberg was sent to propose a 5-year, $100 billion fund for Ukraine to provide stable, long-term financial assistance for its defense against Russian aggression, while NATO allies discussed assuming control of the Ramstein Group to formalize support for Ukraine, partly in anticipation of potential political changes, including the possibility of Donald Trump's re-election in the US. So this is NATO taking control of Ramstein, which is a contact group that gets together 50 nations to support Ukraine militarily. So if NATO takes the controlling position in that group, then the US could step back, and that will allow for a consistency of support there, even if the US has a different change of political winds with the November election looming. A quote, today we discuss Jens' initiative to create a special fund to financially support Ukraine's defences to the amount of 100 billion euros for a period of 5 years. It's important that this is not at the expense of bilateral volumes earmarked in our agreements on security guarantees. This is on top of that which is already in place. That's how much help Ukraine need here. I mean, like I keep saying, we've got to realise this is a world war we're involved in, and it really is the situation that if we don't support now, then we will be paying a lot more down the line, and it will be a lot more significant. Or we see Europe get taken over by Russian influence and the whole political system changing, and we have a new era of an autocratization of the world, of a democratic backsliding that is so, at least in the short time, irreversible that it'll be, it doesn't bear thinking about. Like I am that worried about the direction of travel the world is in at the moment, that this is why it will take money, and that means we as taxpayers will be out of pocket to some degree. Like there will be an expense on this war for the Western world going forward for some years, because it needs to happen. And it's a big sort of philosophical sidebar here. Well, not a big one, I'll keep it short. But like, the world isn't fair, right? And the problem is we all think the world is fair. And so when we go, hang on, that's going to cost taxpayers more money to support Ukraine, that's got to come from somewhere. Either that's got to come from somewhere, and if it's not going to come from somewhere, I don't agree with that happening at all. Because that is affecting me, and I live in this individualistic world now where there has to, like, if something bad happens to me, it has to be balanced somehow. This is called the just world theory. It's a psychological, philosophical position. A just world theory is this kind of inherent intuitive idea that we have that the world is fair. The problem is the world isn't fair. It's just simply completely unfair. So at the beginning of the Second World War, like, it got to that very serious point where it's like, we, like the US, for example, is probably a better example here because they were away from Europe. It was like, okay, this is going to cost us an awful lot of money, but if we want the world to be secure, which is in our best interest politically and economically, if we want the world to be in the best possible position, then we need to invest a load of money and personnel into making or helping the world stay on track. So America, or the US, invested huge amounts of money, finances, and military infrastructure and resources and personnel in supporting the war effort in Europe and indeed in the Pacific. And we're at a point now where we're like, we need to spend a lot of money to make sure the world doesn't go tits up at the moment. And That might seem to many people like it's completely unfair, because the thing is, we didn't start this. We didn't start the fire. Yeah? It's always been burning to some extent, but it's been rekindled, I can tell you, by Putin and his intentions. Now, we either sit back and let that fire rip through Europe, through the world, as other countries autocratically inclined get on board with that worldview, or we stand up to it. The thing is, standing up to that costs money. But I'd rather it cost money for us rather than our lives. So we need to invest now, and that means we won't be able to invest in other ways, or we'll have to dip into reserves, or some we are going to have to pay for that. But it is the right thing to do. It's a bit like because you get so uptight that it's unfair, but it's a bit like uh, people coming round and trashing your fence or whatever. Ne'er-do-wells trashing your fence, and although that might be a bad idea because you can try and get reparations out of them through the legal system, but it could be just, I guess, a tornado ripping through your property and doing lots of damage, and then you claim off insurance and your insurance premiums go up. Life isn't fair. Sometimes bad things happen to you, to your property, to your life, to things, and there is no way of getting that out, back, the cost of that bad thing, out of some other entity. Like somebody has to pay for that, and sometimes crap just happens. So the tornado rips through, and you have to go to your insurance company. It does get paid for, but your premium goes up, and you have to pay an excess, and so on and so forth. You are out of pocket, because you know what? In order to do the right thing, it sometimes costs you. So in order to put my property right, it costs us. In order to put the world right, it costs us. The tornado that's ripping through the world at the moment is one that is man-made, and it's in the form of Putin and his cronies. And I'm sorry, it's just going to cost us to sort it out. Right, German aid to Ukraine has. So what happened here? Right, Euromaidan and other organisations have said there is a $1.13 billion aid package that is in the offing from Germany, and that is new MARDAs, this and that. And German aid to Ukraine is like, hang on, Euromaidan Press and others, you are smashing up several things here. So just to clarify, just in case you've seen this claim that there's $1.13 billion worth of kit that has been a new package that's been offered by Germany, it's not the case. And then in that $1.13 billion kit analysis, Euromaidan Press, for example, were talking about all this stuff. They like smashed two things together. So, okay, this is what's been delivered in the past 3 weeks by Germany. One Skynex air defense system, so that new kind of Geopol that can fire huge amounts of lead into the air at incredible speed. 10 Marder 1A3 infantry fighting vehicles, a Bridge Lane Biber, 6 Oshkosh trucks, 1 Pioneer Panzer DAX armoured engineering vehicle, 9 mine plows, all sorts of other stuff. You can see it all there. Missiles and outboard motors, camouflage nets, first aid kits, mortar ammunition, automatic grenade launcher ammunition for Leopards and Gepards, IRIS-T missiles. Right. And what has been pledged is another Patriot air defense system. That's not there yet. Excellent from Germany. So Germany really are doing an awful lot. We slag them off because of because of tourists, but of course, they're in the background. They're doing just so much stuff for Ukraine compared to many other nations, or really all other nations. The US has now stepped up again. Germany announced a 1.13 billion euro aid package back on the 18th of February. And that's what Euromaidan Press seems to have picked up on and smashed some of this stuff together. Now, that package included, or should include, 18 Panzerhaubitze 2000s, 18 RCH 155. Those are those self-propelled guns on wheels that the UK is now buying into. two Skynet's air defense systems, and then missiles and shells. Now, some of this will be a long time off being delivered, right? So I presume the RCH 155s have been built. I don't know what the time frame. Yeah, 2025. Panzer 2000, 25, 26, and 27. So this is long term aid going on there. So just be warned. Sometimes even mainstream media sources get it just completely wrong. Australia, as I mentioned yesterday, look, they're doing an awesome job, right? They are giving aid. Finally, though, it's taken a long time, and I know you don't like me doing this accent, but I'm going to do it. Bloody hell, I'm going to improve. I've got to get better. Anyway, this package is now got a little bit more detail. $50 million for short-range air defense system, $30 million for unmanned aerial systems, $15 million for other high-priority equipment such as combat helmets, rigid-hull, inflatable boats, fire masks, and generators. It was this last one that we didn't know so much about. So some odds and sods there that'll be very useful for the Ukrainians. Now, John Ridge here saying this is on the back of GLSDB getting a bit of a hard time. Apparently, it's struggling to be as effective as it should be. And I spoke to Colby Badwire in a video yesterday about this. He then sent me this from John Ridge saying Boeing has done similar rapid spiral development for JDAM ER as has Lockheed Martin for GIMLRS. Okay, so what's this? A Boeing spokesperson did not confirm that LaPlante was referring to GLSDB. So when LaPlante, the procurement guy for the DoD, Department of Defense, came out and said, yeah, we've got some problems with something, and people are like, oh, it sounds like GLSDB. So it's not been confirmed, but a Boeing spokesperson did say they are working closely with Defense Department on spiral capability improvements to the ground launch SDB, small diameter bomb system. Spiral capability improvements refers to an iterative software development process. So John Ridge says these firmware software updates have mitigated Russian GPS denial, so jamming from the GPS, but there is still a large burden on Ukrainian mission planning to suppress Russian electronic warfare assets to achieve good effect. In other words, while there might be some deficiencies with GLSDB, you also need to make sure that you're doing as much as you can to mitigate any threat from electronic warfare. So it's not just having a magic bullet in the form of a new weapon that is just, it can magically do whatever you want and is not going to be it's not going to be compromised by anything. You're like, okay, we've done some work on this, hopefully it won't get as compromised, but you're not just going to fire it without thinking about whether there's electronic warfare defense in certain positions. You guys need to think about it as much as we will help you to make sure it is as good as it possibly can be. So I read this to you previously, but in my I think at the end of my live yesterday. So MBDA is a big European multinational defense entity, is currently widely used by our armies, says Sébastien Lecornu, the French defense minister, producing Scalp and Aster missiles, so the cruise missiles and the missiles for their SAMP-T, the Patriot equivalent, of which that we are giving some to Ukraine, including with the urgency that is appropriate to definitively switch to war economy so that we can help. So this is where it gets really important, and this was what I was talking about yesterday. So MBDA's transition to the war economy for Aster missiles is an absolute priority. I've made announcements in which I've mobilized for the first time administrative police powers, which make it possible to prioritize a certain number of subcontractors where civil orders must now take a backseat to military orders. There are plans to open a second Aster missile production line in Italy. The new generation of SAMP-T is a real technological breakthrough for the future, so they are working on a new version of that. Now, the important part is this, that France are, as they've announced, getting onto war footing in their defense industry, and actually that is not just rhetoric. There are tangible ramifications of this. So they I don't know how widespread this is, or whether they are just doing it with particular production lines. This would indicate they're doing it with particular production lines, like the Aster missile here. So transition to the war economy for the Aster missile is an absolute priority, which means that there are administrative police powers to make it possible to prioritize a certain number of subcontractors. In other words, when you've got a company that's like, right, we just got a contract to provide these things for Asta, but we've got to let that wait because we're just fulfilling this contract here for this civil work that we're doing over there. So before we can do the components for Asta, we'll do these. It's going to take us 6 months, and then the French government come in with police powers and say, "You're not doing that for 6 months. You're making that for the Asta missiles, and here's a legal documentation to back up what we're saying here." And that forces a civil entity here, a commercial enterprise, to do exactly what the French government tell it to do in terms of supporting production for weaponry going to Ukraine. Now, this is where Russia is with their entire economy, right? Their entire economy is on that footing whereby the government can say, right, we are just concerned predominantly with manufacturing for the defense, and so you do what we tell you to do. And the fact that we are apparently getting on that kind of footing in places in, say, France and apparently in the UK as well, I think is good news for Ukraine, but it's also an indication of how serious this is. 10 tons of essential medical supplies worth €633,394 will be delivered to Ukrainian hospitals. The administrative region subsidized this is a French administrative region, subsidized neonatal equipment for a hospital in Odessa. So that's really good news. Excellent stuff, France. And then we have here, I mentioned this in the hits and losses video, the destroyed Italian Puma 6x6 armored personnel carrier near Bilorivka, Luhansk region. Prior to this, the delivery of these armored vehicles was not reported. So I mentioned earlier that there are certain nations that keep quiet what they give to Ukraine. Italy is one of those, and so we didn't know that there were these Pumas over in Ukraine, and apparently there are. I don't know how many and whether it's in significant enough quantities, but there you go. Now, moving on to sort of mobilization. This is exactly what I have been advocating for some time. Now, you've got a choice, right? Because you need boots on the ground. And if you are predominantly going to get men to do the job, then you're saying to 50% of the population, you're not drawing from 50% of the population. Now, of course, if women are more likely to be the primary caregivers to children, then you don't necessarily want to take... You can take men out of families, as you know, if the mother is there, then that's okay. But if you take the women out of families, either the man is already out of the family, or there is no man, or the man is left as a primary caregiver, that is not deemed as ideal as a woman there for lots of reasons I won't go into. But it's not like you've got 100% of population, and by taking men, you're taking 50%. But if you say take women, now you've got 100%, and that's fair, and therefore happy days. But I think you do need to be able to dip more deeply into the population to get women to, if you're not going to get them to the front line, and I'm not making and casting any aspersions or saying who can do whatever job, you got a choice, right? You either take more women or don't take more women into the armed services. And then when you do take them into the armed services, you either take them to the front line, give them whatever job that men do, or you say, right, you can't, or you're not best suited to do that job, so we'll put you in other jobs. And then if men are in those jobs that are more suited to frontline work, if that's what you're arguing about, then it's like backfilling, right? So you've just got a set of people who are doing all this stuff for the armed forces. And if you're only going to take men into there, then you're going to find that mobilization becomes increasingly difficult. So you need to be taking men and women, and in fact at older ages, because, okay, front line, you don't want like a 60-year-old man on the front line or woman, fighting in the trenches. But can a 60-year-old man or woman do some demining in a field? Yes. So if you've got a 30-year-old man or woman in the fields demining, let's take them out and put an older person into doing demining. That kind of thinking, I'm sure they are doing that to some degree, but that really needs to be well thought through, because the Ukrainians have a huge challenge with mobilization. Here, Ukraine seeks to involve more women in demining, according to Deputy Prime Minister Syrydenko. Ukraine has limited resources in mine action, including a shortage of demining operators, so it seeks to involve women in this process. Absolutely. And a female drone unit will be formed in Ukraine, according to the commander of the attack drone company, Lutsenko. I absolutely don't see why that hasn't already happened. Selection will take place through a competition, assessment of the ability to perform combat missions, training, verification from SBU, and the final decision on enrolments. And talking about mobilization more generally, particularly outside of Ukraine, and trying to get back those men of draft age from foreign countries from where or to where they have fled at the beginning of the war, particularly. Estonia has said that they will not issue men of draft age to Ukraine for mobilization. Quote, mobilization is a matter concerning the state and its citizens. The Interior Ministry has no plan to forcibly repatriate Ukrainian citizens legally residing in Estonia, the advisor to the Interior Ministry Citizenship and Migration Policy Department said. On the other hand, the President of Lithuania has supported the idea of returning men of mobilization age to Ukraine. Quote, Ukraine must have its own mobilization plans. Ukraine must have the means and tools to invite its young men to serve their homeland. So interesting that two countries next to each other have two completely different approaches. Will you then get, say, people from Lithuania, Ukrainians who are residing in Lithuania going, okay, goodness me, we're all going to now move to Estonia? It's one of these things, it's a bit like a tax haven. This is a draft age man haven. So tax havens happen because the whole world doesn't operate on the same tax regulation. So as soon as one nation changes its taxes, you just go to another nation that hasn't sorted it out. And that's why things like European Union are super important, because you get regulatory conformity there. So, how do you combat tax evasion around the world? How do you combat mobilization evasion around Europe? It's a similar sort of issue there. Right, we've heard that the Slovakians have, and I did yesterday, or I think it was yesterday or the day before, I smashed together Czechia and Slovakia, and of course they're two different nations. I was just a brain fart, so sorry about that. I should know. I've been to both those countries a few times. Anyway, Slovakia have this populist leader, Robert Fico, who is what's the word? What's that word? I can't use that. It's too rude. Oh yeah, tool. He's a tool. You can translate that. He has said that the Slovakian government will not militarily support Ukraine, will not give any military aid, although the defense sector in the country will continue fulfilling contracts for that, because we're happy to take money for it. But morally, politically speaking, that's just it's terrible, isn't it? Like, morally, I'm against that, but if you're going to pay me, I won't be against it. It's like, I'm really against genocide. What if we pay you £1 million for to do some genocide in your country? Yeah, no, that's cool. You can pay me, but like, just morally speaking, I don't want it to happen. So a bit of double standards going on there. Anyway, so the Slovakian people said, right, if you're not going to give military aid to Ukraine, we will fund ourselves the Czech initiative next door. So they have raised now about $4 million or €4 million, which is over $4 million, to buy ammunition for Ukraine. And he said, it's like farting into a tree, Robert Fico. And I say, to coin a phrase I used earlier today, it's like giving fellatio to Putin, Fico. That's what you're doing. I'd rather fart into a tree than give fellatio to Putin. So you stick on that side of the fence, mate. That's fine. But I'll stick with what's morally good and right and proper. He added that the funds allocated by the US and the EU for military support for Ukraine would also not change anything. Of course, that's a bold prediction there, and it's kind of almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're not going to give help to Ukraine because it won't change anything. Yeah. It's literally the thing that will change it, and by not giving it, that won't change anything. And you are just assuming the you're putting the cart before the horse. It's all kind of circular reasoning, etc., etc. You get my point. As Russians are allowed to advance, they continue mobilizing any surviving local men to absorb Ukrainian ammo. I said that yesterday. about how they will continue recruiting men into the armed forces, the Russians, as they move through occupied territories, and it is a real challenge for the Ukrainians. Uh, it is. Yeah, that one was left over from yesterday. It probably shouldn't be there, but I'll tell it you again. You know, you can always hear these things twice. Just to remind you. Worrying that with the Russian defense manufacturing, how much help they're getting not only from China, but actually from the rest of the world as well. So Trantilenko here says, so where are the Western sanctions against these Chinese firms? Seriously, it's not just the Chinese firms, actually, it's elsewhere as well. I mean, the point is, you look at even 2022, so sanctions were in place. Russia were ramping up their own production, but then it got to sort of 2023 and they're like, okay, we need to really change things now. This is not going well for us. And then look what happened there. This is monthly imports of key military goods in the thousands, and China suddenly turns up, and the rest of the world. Just huge difference coming into sort of late spring 2020, or coming into spring summer 2023. Absolutely incredible, and that's a challenge. What does the rest of the world do about that? And we've heard, what is it that's just been announced by one of the maritime insurers, that the oil price cap is not working now. We've got to a point where only 15% of the ships are, abiding by that, or some statistic, and so some work really needs to be done around the oil price cap. Now, as I told you earlier, debris from a North Korean missile was found in Kharkiv, say UN sanctions monitors. The question is, what happens about this? So we know that Russia are using North Korean missiles. 3 sanctions monitors travelled to Ukraine earlier this month to inspect the debris. They could not independently identify from where the missile was launched, nor by whom. In other words, it's just some debris on the floor, right? Information on the trajectory provided by Ukrainian authorities indicates it was launched within the territory of the Russian Federation, they wrote in the 25th of April report to the Security Council's North Korea Sanctions Committee. Such a location, if the missile was under control of Russian forces, would probably indicate procurement by nationals of the Russian Federation, they said, adding that this would be in violation of the arms embargo imposed on North Korea in 2006. The Russian and North Korean missions to the United Nations in New York did not immediately respond for a request. Who knew? The US and others have accused North Korea of transferring weapons to Russia for use against Ukraine. I don't know what you can do about this. Russia last month vetoed the annual renewal of the UN sanctions monitors, known as a panel of experts that have for 15 years monitored enforcement of UN sanctions on North Korea over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The mandate for the current panel of experts will expire on Tuesday. So Russia is looking to even get rid of these experts that go around actually finding that it's like voting out the police. Police are going to investigate me for robbing that store last Tuesday. I vote to get rid of them. I vote to get rid of the police. How convenient. You voted and the police are now no longer there. No, there you go. And also I'm going to vote the legal system out. Oh, it turns out I can do what I like. Oh, dictatorship. Russia. Right. One of the comments on my video from, when was it? 13 hours ago, is worth sharing with you. This is from Kasprawi, saying supposedly they talk about fortifications, nothing to the military aid video, but I meant to talk about it, or had I read this earlier, I would have included it in my last video. Supposedly there is no major line of fortifications behind Ocheretny, so that is, or Ocheretina. That's north of Avdiivka, where the Russians are making some huge gains. A Polish expert, Jacek Bartosiak, founder of Strategy and Future, claims that the decision to build fortifications was unpopular to make last year due to political reasons. Building such fortifications would imply that Ukraine agrees to lose all the land in front of these. So, according to the expert, there were no fortifications built to not sadden the local population. Because I wonder what are the reasons for these fortifications not being built. There's long been said that there's been an argument between, or there was an argument between the central state and um, I guess, the military as to who should be responsible for building the fortifications, who should pay for it, who's like the state obviously pays eventually, but does it come from kind of local regions financing, or does it come from the military? And then who is contracted to build it? Do you take soldiers out? Do you get contractors in? So there are all these kind of practical arguments where you're like, hang on, Russia's just built a shed load of these and they've done it really quickly and effectively. Stop piddling about, guys, and get it done. But actually, there could have been some real political reasons behind this, such as if you start building these fortifications, then it's saying to the international community, look, we've got a kind of a if you like a sort of border here, that then the Russians can say, okay, we'll take that land up to those fortifications, as if it gives kind of ammunition to appeasement and to forced negotiations, or the eventual outcome of these negotiations that might happen. So interesting. I've never thought about this before. So according to the expert, there were no fortifications built to not sadden the local population. Lack of Ukrainian reserves is another issue here that won't be easy to address. Hence, it will be very difficult to stabilise the front line behind there. Even if such Russian advances could be seen as symbolic in the grand scheme of things, these might have serious implications for the draft in Ukraine. If a new draft law would be passed now, there's a higher chance more Ukrainian men would do anything to avoid fighting for their country. At this stage, when all the strong patriots have already joined the fight, remaining men would be more willing to join an army which is winning, or at least defending more successfully, rather than the one which suffers heavy losses, complains about lack of equipment, and has to constantly retreat under barrages of Russian fire. Lack of successes, further retreat means the draft dodgers. Means more draft dodgers likely. Hope it'll get better, but looks like upcoming months will be difficult for Ukraine. In other words, so this is kind of connected to what we're just saying in terms of mobilization. The arguments for and against fortifications, I mean, they definitely need fortifications. I think we're beyond the political arguments about it. But it's interesting that actually, if you don't have those fortifications, then you're going to cede more territory for the Russians, be on the run, be on the back foot, and you're less likely to be able to mobilize people because you're not solidly in control of what you're doing and defending. If you're solidly defending, have these really good fortifications and defensive lines, then it gives much more confidence to those people in the population that you want to mobilize. Interesting ideas there. Anyway, thought I'd throw that one in. Take care, everybody. Speak to you soon.